Hello everyone, welcome to AWS Tutorials. In AWS Tutorials, we provide workshops and exercises to learn about AWS services. These workshops and exercises are published to our website aws-dojo.com. Today, I'm going to talk about how you can use API Gateway to create APIs which work as proxy for AWS services. So let's get started. First, try to understand why we need a proxy kind of service. Sometimes you need to create an API which has to perform very basic operation on AWS services, like making a direct API call without putting any other business logic in between. So for instance, if you're talking about Amazon S3 as an example, you want to simply put object or get object or list bucket or get bucket, things like that, without any business logic, just like making a direct API call to put object or get object or list bucket. Nothing, no additional business logic in between. Or like if you're talking about DynamoDB, then you want to get item or put item. There's no other business logic in between. And similarly, if you talk about a queue service, SQS, then send message, receive message. So sometimes you have a requirement where you need to create an API for one AWS services, but in API you don't want to put any kind of business logic. All the API has to do is call very native AWS service API like this put object, put item, get item, send message kind of thing without any additional business logic to perform the operations. If you have this kind of requirement, then you need a proxy API, because all your API has to do is work as a proxy, simply perform the operation on the backend AWS service without putting any in-between business logic. Now, one solution is that you create a REST API in the API gateway, and then that API gateway can call a lambda function, and then this lambda function can use your AWS service API to call this put or get or send message kind of operations. But in this case, well, this is a working method. It can work, but the challenge here is that this lambda function is doing nothing here. It's just simply taking the message from here and simply calling the API call. It is literally adding no business logic here, because it's not supposed to, because the requirement is to simply call the put object, call the get object, and get the task done. You don't need anything beyond that. So you are maintaining this lambda function, which is of course the cost for you, plus you have to maintain its deployment and everything, but it's not adding any value. So this is one working solution, but here the lambda function is not really adding any value. So the better solution is that you create the REST API where you configure API gateway as a proxy to the AWS service. Yeah. So you configure API gateway as a proxy to the AWS service, and here the AWS service could be like S3, DynamoDB, SQS, SNS, RDS, you name it, right? And then this proxy service simply calls these API methods over here, passing the message and get the job done. So here you don't have any lambda, which is because you don't need any lambda, because it really had no backend business logic. All you wanted to do is simply make a call to the API in your AWS service, and in this case the API gateway is doing the same thing. That's why it is a proxy service. So it is a better solution, because here API gateway is simply kind of taking a message and then passing it to the AWS service API to get the job done. So let's try to understand, if we want to configure API gateway to create a proxy API, what it takes. Okay, so we will understand this with one example, and we will also do a hands-on with this example, so you get a feel of how configure a proxy service. So we are going to create a REST API in API gateway, which will actually call the PutItem method on DynamoDB to insert a record into DynamoDB. There is no business logic. Simply, I want to insert the record into DynamoDB, and this API is called from a client. Okay, so this is the example. So let's take this as an example to understand how to configure a proxy API, and then we will also do a hands-on lab about it. So let's get started. So first thing first is handling the permission. Now in this case, this API you create into API gateway has to put an item into DynamoDB. That means your API gateway or API in the API gateway should have permission to call PutItem method on the DynamoDB. And for that, what you do, you simply create an IAM role for API gateway. So you create an IAM role for API gateway, assign it to that particular API so that that API has got now permission to call the PutItem method on DynamoDB. So this what you need to do from the authorization point of view to make sure that the API is authorized to call the backend service API method to perform the task. That's the first thing you need to do. Now, which service to call? How do you configure which service to call in your API? So when you're trying to configure your API, and again guys, you're going to do a hands-on lab about it, so you will get full experience of configuring it by yourself. So when you are configuring an API in the API gateway, first you select your HTTP method. Your HTTP method could be post, put, get, delete, standard ones. So you can select your HTTP method. I'm giving post as an example here. Then you select your AWS region, like EU West 1 as an example over here. So, and then you select your AWS service like DynamoDB as an example over here. And finally, you select your action. Now, when it comes to action, there are two methods available actually. It's called action type actually. An action type could be an action name or could be a path override. And path override I'm not discussing over here. So because I find this action thing very interesting because it really helps you understand how your AWS service API works and how to pass message to it. So let's stick to the action here, not the path override method. So in the action method, what you do is that you select one action which you want to call on the DynamoDB. So these four configuration you do at the API level to let API know which AWS service to call. So what this configuration tell me that this API when call using the HTTP post method is going to call this DynamoDB service in EU West, and in this DynamoDB service, it's going to call the PutItem API. So this proxy is going to call PutItem API to the DynamoDB table in EU West 1 when this API is called through a HTTP method post. Simple, yeah? There is no business logic, to be honest. It's one-page configuration, yeah? Now, so this is what you need to do to direct the API, which service, which method to call. Then comes message handling, and this is the core, this is the crux. If you understand this part, you can build proxy API in and out, like even while we use the word while you're sleeping kind of thing, yeah? So let's understand how message handling works. So again, going by this example, we have to create an API which is going to call the PutItem method in Amazon DynamoDB table. Always start from your API level. So suppose when you're trying to call a PutItem method on Amazon DynamoDB table, what kind of JSON request PutItem wants, okay? You have to start looking from that point of view. So you have to work backwards. So you have to look at, like in this case, you are configuring PutItem as a method to be called and the API to be called at DynamoDB. So you need to see that, okay, this PutItem, what kind of JSON request it wants. So if I look at this template over here, it says, okay, so in this PutItem at minimum, I mean, you can put many other things, but at minimum, just to keep it simple and simple to understand, you need to have a table name. then you need to provide your items or record, and then in the record you need to have your primary key field name, and then primary key value, and then your other fields and values. It's a NoSQL, so primary key is mandatory and rest you can keep flexible, and other fields and their values. This is how the template look like for if you're calling a put item. Now this you have to think first. Okay, so let's convert this into first an example so that we can work concrete. So suppose in this case we are going to call a dojo table, and in that dojo table the primary key is ID, whose value is value 1. I'm passing value 1 as a value, and then other field I'm passing is message, which is a value 2. Both are string type. Fair enough. So this is the method I need to I have to pass to the put item. So what your client has to do, so one method which we call a pass through method. Okay, so there are two ways. Now this method, this JSON document has to be passed to DynamoDB put item method. Okay, so that your DynamoDB can simply pass this as a parameter to the put item method, and the table item is created or record is created. So there are two ways this JSON document can be passed. One way is that your client will send the same JSON document. So client says, okay, fine, I'm going to send the same JSON document, table name, items, fields over here, and then in API gateway, all you do, you choose a pass-through configuration. They say, I'm going to pass through, and that's it. That means API gateway is simply taking this message from the client. So when the client calls this API using the post method, passes this as a request body, this API gateway will simply take the message and pass through to the DynamoDB put item method. So it gets this JSON body, passes as a parameter to put item as a JSON body, and voila, your put item will take care of creating the record into DynamoDB table. All good. Yeah, this is one method. I can call it a pass-through method. Many people don't like this method because you are exposing certain information at the API level which people don't like to expose. For instance, here you are exposing the table name. Now by doing so, your client knows which table I am inserting the data. So you can see that it is little too much information given to the client. Okay, so clients should not know the table name. All they should simply know is, okay, this is the I'm creating a customer record here, and this is the customer information, and simply go and save it somewhere. Why I should know that it will go to some dojo customers table, right? Similarly, I mean, when people trying to use with the queue or with the with notification service, they don't want to client to know that which queue we are sending information, which table we are sending information, which topic we are publishing information, which S3 bucket we are putting information. You don't want client to know that. I mean security is one of the concerns, and sometimes people want to hide such information so that even if they change the whole backend thing, your client code should not change. Suppose your S3 bucket changes tomorrow, your queue changes tomorrow, then your client code should not change, because if your client has to pass the bucket name, queue name, topic name, table name as a parameter, if your table changes, your client code will also change. So security, maintainabilities are some of the issues. People don't want information like table, queue names, topics to be passed as a parameter by the client. And that's where another method becomes very interesting, and that is called request mapping method. And what this request mapping method does is that in this case, client will pass only that much information, only the minimum information required. Okay, so like in this case, it is going to pass simply ID as a value 1 and message as a value 2. That's it. It's not going to pass anything else. But this information is not complete, because this is what client is passing. This is what put item is expecting. So what we need to do is that somehow translate this message into this message, because this message is okay, good enough. Client has sent the minimum required information, but this information is not good enough to call the PutItem method with this kind of information. So we need to use some kind of mapping over here, and that's where in your integration request part of the API, actually you can do request map. You can create a request mapping template. Okay, so how does this template look like? So this template looks like following. So you can have, so for instance, your request template will have the same structure as how you are passing to the API in the DynamoDB server. So look at this structure and look at this structure. Both are same. Yeah. Only difference is that this structure is, or this map here is taking information from the information passed by the client. So like in this case, if you see, it is saying that this part is very much hard coded into your template, saying, okay, my table name is Dojo table in this case. So now think of a scenario that if your table name changes, then all you need to go simply come to request mapping table, change the table name, and voila, you are good. Your client need not to know. And then the second one, you can see that this value ID value one passed is simply taking, hey, input path, take the ID value. Yeah, so this value getting mapped over here. Similarly, the message value is getting mapped over here. So basically, by using the request mapping template, it is taking the information passed by the client, and then this information actually then it is using to create using the request mapping templates, create a message which it can then pass to the PutItem method over here. Now, one of the benefits of the request mapping template is that it can also read informations from the runtime context. So sometime, like for instance, ID. In this case, I'm asking ID to be passed by client. But suppose you want ID to be picked from your API context. By say some runtime ID or some kind of that information you want to pick to create the ID. In this case, even this ID information need not to be passed by client. The client can simply pass the message method, and then this template can actually read the context of the API call to create its own ID. Yeah. So this template is smart enough to read the information from the API runtime context also to make use of that information. So in fact, the hands-on lab you're going to do, in that case, the client will not pass the ID, but it will use the API will use the runtime context to actually create the ID by own. But the bottom line here is that, guys, this is your client message, and this is the message which DynamoDB expects. So what you do that in the request mapping template, you create a message which looks similar to what your backend system wants. And then here you do the request mapping, and which primarily means that the values are passed from the client message, or as well as from the API your API runtime context. Now, with this, what happens, your client will simply call the API using the post method, passing this as the request body. And then by virtue of request mapping template, this message will convert into this using this template as a this message. So this template will convert this message into this message. And then this message is passed to DynamoDB PutItem method as a request body, and then PutItem will simply go and create the item record into DynamoDB table. Simple. I really find this method so fascinating because it's so scientific. You start working from backwards, and then so you look into your AWS service method request body, you look into your client side request body, and then you simply create this mapping template to convert your client message into AWS service message, pass it, your job is done. Okay? So Having understood this, what we are going to do today, that we are going to simply build this whole scenario we just discussed as an example. So you are going to create a REST API, which client will call, and then REST API will simply call the PutItem method on DynamoDB table to create the record. In order to build this exercise, we have, in fact, create this hands-on lab. We have built one exercise and published to our website, aws-dojo.com. This exercise is also, the URL of the exercise is also available in the description box below. So let me walk you through the steps of the exercise, and post that you can run this exercise by your own to get an experience of building a proxy API inside in API gateway. So let's jump to the exercise. So here's the exercise published to our website, aws-dojo.com. So let's get started. So there are certain steps you need to perform to complete the exercise. The first step is prerequisite, which talks about you need to have an AWS account in order to complete this exercise. And if you don't have an AWS account, that you might want to use this link to create the AWS account. Then we create a DynamoDB table, and this table is the table which is used as a backend AWS service for Proxy API. So we go to DynamoDB management console, and then say we want to create a new table, and then we create a table with primary key as ID, which is of string type. We keep rest of thing to the default and simply create a table. Once the table is created in no time, then you create the IAM role for the API gateway. So you go to IAM management console roles, and you want to create a role, and then you select a role for the API gateway, and then you give this role a nice name, say Dojo API access role, and then you simply create the role. Now by default, this role has only access to Amazon API gateway push to CloudWatch log. So, but through this API gateway, you need to call a DynamoDB table. So you have to provide additional permission to this table. And for that, we kept it very simple. We simply added one more permission to the role, which is Amazon DynamoDB full access. Now we are giving here, to keep the thing simple, we are giving here a large permission, but actually you can very much restrict this role to call only put item method on a certain table as well. So you can really restrict your policy to that label, but we kept it very simple as of now. Now the role is created. You make note of the role ARN, because you need it later when you try to configure the API in the API gateway. Now we go to the API gateway to create the API. So we go to the API gateway console. We say we want to create a REST API. Say it's a new API, Dojo Proxy API, for instance. Once the API is created, we want to create a method, and in the method we put post as the method, and we say we configure the method. And here is the one of the primary configuration you do. So in this case, you're saying that this post method is going to actually integrate with AWS service, the service in the EU West 1 region, the AWS region. This is the service. I am calling a post method, and I told you there are two types of action you can perform: action name or path override. And in this one, I'm focusing on action name. Probably path override I will cover in some other session. So I'm saying I want to call some action on this DynamoDB table, and that action is PutItem. Then our execution role is the IAM role you created earlier to authorize the API to call to DynamoDB table, and your content handler is simply passed through at this point of time, and simply you save it. Okay. So now what happens that your API method is completed. Now this is good enough. Now after step number 5, actually, if you pass the request, if you call this API with the request body of the PutItem method, actually it will work. But we don't want to do that. We want to use the request mapping template so that your client has to send the minimum information, and information like table name and those kind of things you can hide. So in order to do so, what you do, your method is already configured. We click on this integration request configuration of the method. And here you will find a section called mapping templates. And here say, I want to add one mapping template. So you create this mapping template and you click on that and you say, hey, use this template when when no match, there's no template matches when no template matches, request content type header. Yeah, okay. And then, I'm simply adding the mapping template here. The mapping template is of application JSON type. It will ask for confirmation. It will say that, hey, by putting so, you're telling to the API that if it will use the pass-through behavior if request type does not match, request JSON does not match, but if request method JSON matches, then it's going to use the mapping template. So basically it's saying that when the request come, if the request JSON matches to the template we have, then we simply use the mapping. Otherwise, we will use the pass-through behavior. Yeah, it's as simple as that. So what we do, so we are creating adding a mapping template. This is a kind of warning comes to you. So because you're trying to change you're trying to create a map over here. It is of application and JSON type. And then here you add the map. And here you can see here that I'm simply taking the message node from the request to create the message. And for the ID part, actually I'm not getting the ID from my client side. I'm simply saying, hey, in my runtime context, whatever is the request ID for the API, simply pass that as an ID. So just to show you or demonstrate that this ID your client could have passed. In that case, you simply read, like you're reading the message, you read the ID as well. But just to demonstrate you that you can also make use of context, API context information, we changed template here a bit to read the request ID from the API context, runtime context, and then pass that as an ID. And all good. Then you're done. Then we can test it. So we are going to simply test it. So we are going to use this client over here for the testing purpose. So we click on the test client over here, and then all I'm doing here is that passing this message saying, hey, AWS Dojo rocks, and I think you guys will agree here. And then this we passed as a request body and simply click on the test. Yeah, API test is successful. We get status 200 back. And then if I go to DynamoDB table, you can see here that it has created a row over here with this AWS Dojo rocks as a message, and your ID is the ID of the API gateway. It's an API gateway it's API runtime context request ID you passed over here, to be precise. And then you follow the next step, which is more of a clean up the resources so that you don't incur any cost post the exercise. So this was the exercise, guys, to understand how you can configure API proxy API and API gateway to call the AWS services in the backend without using any business logic, simply making the API call to the AWS service. Hope you like it, and if you like, please click on the like button. Please subscribe to my channel. There are many other similar workshops and exercises which are published to our website aws-dojo.com to learn about AWS services. Please explore our website to learn about AWS services. And if you have any feedback, any comment, any questions, any request for new content, you can either provide that in the comment section of the YouTube channel, or you can also click on the contact us tab over here to provide the feedback. We always look forward to your feedback to improve our content, our delivery to you. So I look forward to that. I promise to come back again in a couple of days' time with another video. In the meantime, stay safe and have a nice day. Bye-bye.